Hello, everyone. I am the Hellbound Sinner, Chris. Welcome to the Religious Nut and Hellbound Sinner podcast.
And I'm the religious nut, Brother James. How have you been, Kingy?
I have been mostly fantastic, but I was down for about a week and a half with strep.
Strep throat?
Yeah. It was...
Kingy, we can't use that word.
Oh, my bad.
Well, I'll edit it out.
Because you're beautiful.
I try. Anyway, well, that and the fact that you use that word just both demonstrate why you are the Hellbound Sinner.
I am. See, I mean, it was God's judgment. It totally was.
So, as you can tell by the title of the podcast episode today, we are talking about politics. Yay!
Yay!
I used to love politics, and I still kind of do sometimes, but Donald Trump, you know, it's really different. Yeah.
I mean, any campaign year always gets me down anyway, because it's let's reduce all this complex stuff to like 2 issues at a 3rd grade level.
Yeah, there's a lot of dumbing down to politics. It's really not helpful political dialogue at all when you can reduce everything to a soundbite that lasts like 10 seconds. Where do you put yourself on the spectrum, the political spectrum? You're what, a fundamentalist conservative right?
Oh, yes, totally. Sarah Palin is my hero.
Oh, yeah, she's mine too. No. Anyway.
Actually, well, surprise, I was pretty strong Republican when I was a teenager. Spent a lot of time with my grandpa and listening to beautiful Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity all the time, so...
Hey, I appreciate Rush Limbaugh. I can't stand Sean Hannity.
Really? Because usually from people I hear it's the other way around.
I appreciate the intelligence and humor of Rush Limbaugh. I'll say that.
But yeah, I've gone on a journey since then, needless to say. But I lean more liberal, progressive. At the same time, I'm kind of more libertarian than big government. So
in all aspects, or just social, or what?
Honestly, I can't sum it up in one little neat, concise statement, because I tend to think, you know, the solution for one place doesn't necessarily work for another. Like a lot of times people are saying, let's just make ourselves like Denmark or Sweden, where they're working on a much smaller scale, and then the U.S. level, we're on a much grander scale, and it doesn't always trickle down the same. So
That's really interesting, because you know what? I mean, you and I are much closer to each other politically than I thought we would be. I consider myself largely libertarian, you know, obviously coming from a more conservative understanding of things. But I don't want the government to be dictating how the sacrament of marriage works. I think that's something that the church should do, which means that if 2 people want to go to a church that supports gay marriage and get married in the eyes of that church, that is their religious freedom right to do. And it should not be a governmental thing, as an example. I mean, so, you know, we come at it from different angles, but we tend to want government out of most of our lives. Now, you'd agree with that, right?
Yes. Because, like I said, I take more the left side on a lot of issues, but honestly, after working for so many corporations and all the micromanagement that gets forced on us that slows us down and messes up the process, yeah, I've seen the not workable side of it. I mean, maybe in a perfect world, but no.
So we consider ourselves wanting less government, but I mean, do we see that the same way? I don't know. I guess we'll have to figure that out.
I know. I don't completely think we do, but...
We would put different emphases. Like, I would put bigger emphasis on definitely religious freedom over, say, I don't know, business or whatever. What would be the big ones for you?
A big one for me, I mean... Probably because I work so much in this field, but mental health being a huge thing for me. And I'm kind of undecided on how much slack the government does and does not need to take up on it, just because in the state of Oklahoma right now, we're at such a dire place. I mean, both mental health and education, those are both kind of big ones for me. And funding for mental health is poor. The regulation of it is poor. Access is poor. And most people, at least in this state, the biggest... inpatient facility for mental illness is our state penitentiary, because most of them end up there through self-medication and substance abuse. So I don't pretend to have the best answers to it, but that's something I'm definitely big on. And then Also big on LGBT rights too. So
Okay. So would you define that as more like sexual freedom?
I don't know if I'd heard that term before.
You've never heard that term before, really? Huh.
Sexual freedom, at least politically.
Okay. I mean, because it's a big kind of sort of rallying cry, like the sexual revolution of the '60s and such.
Okay, well, I see that. Yeah, yeah, maybe it might be similar to that. But basically, the way I see that is just, I'm not on the side, the extremist side where everybody just needs to accept us. I mean, I don't think I really came out in the last podcast. I identify as pansexual and gender fluid.
Already in the second episode, you're gonna.
There we are. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
Yay! But anyway, my biggest concern is just that our safety being protected.
If I can add on to that, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I'm coming as the conservative Christian who considers those things. I want to word this without offending anyone. We don't consider those things good for the body of Christ and for those who claim to be Christians. Actions involving that. Coming from that perspective, I am against the idea of showing hatred towards anyone anyone in general.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is just mutual respect. I mean, I can have a lot of problems with what other people might do or think or feel or believe, but I'm still going to show them respect as a human being, and I would just ask the same. I don't ask, everybody to recognize. I mean, again, it is really a touchy subject, because if you talk to any of us, we're like, well, this is really who I am. So it's difficult when you have these kind of conversations, but at the same time, I think if we can at least start with some mutual respect,
yeah,
we've at least made a lot of progress.
So, for instance, I actually have so you're a good friend of mine, and you identify as pansexual and gender fluid and such. So, without compromising my own beliefs, where I believe, biologically what is traditionally understood and such, and gender, as far as genders and biology and all that, I refrain from using pronouns concerning you. Because I don't want to compromise what my beliefs are on that, and I don't want to disrespect you as well.
Yeah, I think
that.
Yeah,
I think those types of stances need to be more prevalent in Christendom, definitely. Oh, and what about education as well? What do you think about the government's role in education? Because we talked about that on Facebook a few days ago.
We did, and again, speaking from my experience, which I've lived in Oklahoma now for 9 years. And these last couple of years with the agency I work for, I've had the opportunity to do several substance abuse and mental health counseling groups in many different schools around the area, and networked with the state of education in our state is really not the greatest right now, and we've had funding cut, we've had so many people fired, laid off, and many schools have gone down to a 4-day week instead of a 5-day week. So yeah, it's kind of a sad state right here. And actually, I know several people who choose to homeschool in this state, not for a religious reason, but just because they're dissatisfied with our public school system. So I can't take an either or stance in this case, because I definitely get very concerned about the people who say, well, it just needs to be a free market thing, because then I'm concerned that people without enough money or status might not get access to a good education. And then on the other side, I think those who are concerned about the government regulating everybody's education have good reason to be concerned. And I really see, the community that you're in really, I believe, should be more responsible for your education than somebody 3,000 miles away.
Totally agree on that part, definitely.
I mean, the main exception I might make is if you're living in a huge metropolitan area where you're more connected with the larger world and you need to be savvy on a lot of multicultural stuff, then that might be more important.
Uh-huh. So for me, I'm a huge advocate of private schools, specifically like religious private schools. Now, if you're not in a religion, I'm not going to say you should go to I would say, hey, it's cool if you go to the religious school, but I don't think you should be forced to. I'm not a fan of public education for a few reasons. Public education has, I don't like the idea of government teaching people, because government, a lot of people I talk to who grew up in public schools really have this concept that like the government can do no wrong, almost kind of thing, you know. And I know that's anecdotal, but
Yeah.
I see that as a problem, that there is at least that opportunity to do so, to where the entire population can be persuaded that we can trust our government. And like that's where I see it in a lot of like the Bernie supporter fans and all that, and
Right.
and many of them claim like, hey, I'm against evil corporations. I'm like, well, if you're against evil corporations, I mean, is the government not the biggest corporation out there? And
Sometimes it's hard to tell where one leaves off and the other begins. Sometimes, honestly.
yeah, and that's the thing. I don't understand this total hatred for any corporation, as in like where the word corporation itself becomes evil, and then this like total love of government, and like the government won't be corrupt ever, kind of thing.
Not to totally interrupt your train of thought, but I know I brought this up to you the other day, and I think it's applicable here. I read this fantastic book a couple years ago, and it's actually been updated since I read it, but it's called Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong.
I've heard of it. Yeah, you're telling me about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's written by a guy who he's an academic historian, and the book is him analyzing 12 different, the most common high school American history textbooks, matching it against what history actually is, the way it presents history, what it tells about our past, and really he's found that it's filled with a lot of rhetoric, a lot of really fables, and trying to instill blind patriotism. And he said, if you get to the collegiate level, or especially to the level where we're actually doing the work, this is totally misrepresenting the work that we do. And he had tried to submit his own textbook for publication multiple times and never got it accepted. So.
Well, that last part in and of itself doesn't mean much, but the rest of it, yeah.
I got you, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to read it. Yeah, and so I that's why I'm not a big fan of public schools, and I really would rather them not exist, to be honest. But if they do exist, I want them to exist very minimally.
Well, could I ask you, do you have an idea of what a possible solution would be for the underprivileged or those who maybe couldn't afford a private school?
I grew up poor. I grew up really poor, and my family still managed to get me to Christian school all the time, and we ended up getting. So, for instance, one time, actually not more than one time, we constantly got scholarships from people at our churches who would pay for our private school education, and there are a lot of things like that. Now, I am a huge proponent of school voucher systems. I absolutely love school voucher systems.
I'm not too familiar with that process.
If I am the father of a very low-income family, what I can do is I can have my child go to a private school, and the money that would have been spent on my child in public school instead goes towards that private school to pay for the tuition and all that. Yeah. Florida, where I grew up, has various forms of that throughout. I can't remember. VPK, I think, is the name of one of the programs. It has those types of ideas, and they work very well. I like it.
What do you even think of the 8 hours a day, 12 years system of education? Is that something that you're in support of, or do you think it might need to be tweaked to a different way of doing it, or what are your thoughts?
I think we, quote, educate our children way too much, to where many of them hate education. There are things that they don't need to know that we keep teaching them. I think that we tend to have too many grade levels that are just kind of teaching things that you don't need to know to enter, the basic workforce or whatever,
Yeah.
Ron Swanson, and this will be our next thing. Ron Swanson's a huge hero of mine.
Oh my god. I had such a hate relationship with that man. Oh my god. But yeah, I think there's some about that I can agree with. I grew up in a very opposite of that perspective, being told, education's so dumbed down now. We were like gods before, and we didn't know everything. And then especially once I deconverted from Christianity, I started to get really obsessed with educating myself on a lot of things that I felt like I'd missed out on before. In many ways, I still feel like I did. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the experience. I love knowing as much as I know. And at the same time, working as I do as a mental health professional in public schools, I've just noticed a severe lack in helping kids and teenagers develop as a whole person, because we spend so much time building their cognitive abilities or ramming information into their head, and there's not as much assistance in helping them develop emotionally, socially, spiritually, whatever you mean by that,
Well, no, and I totally agree. I think it's got to be a more holistic thing. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons I like religious Christian education so much, because for me, at least, I noticed a more holistic approach, because I've done all three. I've done homeschooling. I've been homeschooled. I've been private schooled, Christian, and I've been in public school.
Yeah,
and
same here.
There's just a holistic approach to it that is lacking in public education, because in public education, and do I want to get on the soapbox? No, I'm not going to say it. I'll put it in a nice way. Public education, the student to teacher ratio is just many times too big for the teacher to be able to spend time with each one.
It is.
And the sort of the mindset of a lot of public schools is, as you pointed out earlier, ram information down their throats and call it a day.
Yeah. Well, and some of the kids that I get in my groups, not all of them, but a couple of them, it seems to be the teachers identify these as the quote-unquote problem kids that we can't keep in line, so fix them,
Yeah.
And I take them in there, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys are just kids. I mean, okay, yeah, I see why there's concern, and maybe we can get there, but, it's like, I understand the problem the teachers have with having so many kids in there, and they got people breathing down their neck, and they have to keep their class under control, whatever that means, and so
that's why smaller classes and public schools are not going to help with that, because public schools tend to centralize it all and stuff. And I think the kids need to learn. The last year I was in public school was 6th grade, I want to say. I think that we need, and I've seen actually a bit of increase in this in at least the public schools of my school that my brother went to, because he went to high school, public school. The more VOTEC sort of things, learning how to take apart and put together an engine, learning how to, fix minor repairs in the house and all that. I think those types of things, working with your hands, gardening, learning those types of things. We need to learn that too.
Well, and I think the other side of this as well is tertiary level of education versus the payout or the availability of jobs.
Yeah.
Right now, I am lucky to have gotten a full-time job in my field as an under supervision professional counselor. There's many people in my position that work for 3 or 4 years under supervision because they can barely get any counseling jobs with their master's degree. And even right now, I'm barely paying my bills with my salary. And that's just my experience, but I've heard so many stories from even people with doctorates who are on food stamps. And we get fed this idea that get higher level education, higher salary, all this stuff. And the other thing is, we can't rule out the fact that even the higher education thing is its own lucrative business in and of itself, because here's a field. We can educate you for it. Get in here to this program. Pay us for it. And really, I've learned as a counselor. I'm not going to discredit my education because I value what I did receive, but for money's worth, compare and contrast here, I've learned so much more after graduating than I did during school. So
that was that's actually something I wanted to get to, and I'm glad you said it. Kingy, we're agreeing way too much. We need to actually have differences.
I know, right?
No, but one of the things I really hate about undergraduate studies is that, the stereotypical, gender studies program major who can't find a job. I'm like, yes, because you studied feminist dance interpretation. Yes. It's just like that whole thing. And, we have the conservative versions of that too in Christian colleges where you've got I got a missions degree.
Yep.
And like, no, if you want to be a missionary, learn something like a trade, be a pilot, be something for Pete's sake. But good grief. Anyway, and I say this as the person who got a philosophy degree.
You are going to be eating ramen noodles the rest of your life.
No, well, I'm becoming a priest, so you know.
Oh, there's that. I mean, there is that.
Yeah. So like, it's not because I didn't go into the degree. I'm not. I didn't keep this degree because of the opportunities in and of itself at all.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on education, but are there any other major central political issues that are really important to you?
Well, there are, but I think to be honest, things like abortion, I think really deserve their own episode.
Okay.
Almost.
Fair enough.
Because that's such a deep topic, and we obviously disagree. Well, not obviously, but we disagree on that.
We do disagree on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm pro-life and all that.
And I'm a baby murderer.
We could actually put that all into just sex in general, a sex podcast. We call it the sexy podcast episode.
Yeah.
So, I hear you wanting to make a lot of jokes right now.
Yeah, I'm refraining. I am refraining.
So, who are your political heroes?
I have a good few. I like some things about Karl Marx. I like Machiavelli, Thomas Jefferson, and John Lennon.
Rand and Ron Paul are two of my big guys right now.
Oh.
I lean more towards Rand Paul, the son, than Ron Paul, because Ron Paul's a bit too libertarian for me. John Kasich is a huge hero of mine now. I like, the more I've learned about him, I like him. He's really a moderate Republican, but he's such a man of character. It's hard for me to think of him as he seems like a very moral kind of person. Those are people who are contemporaries. Ronald Reagan is still one of my favorite presidents. And there's someone else that I'm trying to think of. It's not Ayn Rand. I can't stand her.
Okay, good to know.
I'm a libertarian who cannot stand Rand.
We could have a whole podcast episode just on her, couldn't we?
Let's
we might agree too much.
Hey, she's on your side. She's not a Christian.
No, but I'm not on her side.
Okay. Actually, you know what?
She started her own cult,
Yeah. Actually, I'm a huge gamer, and you don't play video games too much.
Not much, no.
But you really should play a game called Bioshock, and I've told you about it before.
Yeah, and you showed me some videos of it, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the idea of basically if Ayn Rand created her own world.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
It's amazing, and the character, one of the characters named who started the city, his name is Andrew Ryan, and it's influenced by Ayn Rand. So.
Yeah, the main reason I know about Ayn Rand, whatever, is I was really into this fantasy series called Sword of Truth by Terry Goodkind years ago.
Okay, yeah.
And he's a huge devotee of hers, but you don't really start seeing it in the series until about book 6 or 7. And then after that, it's like rammed down your throat. So, yeah.
I'm still officially in the Republican Party, and I especially after this election, I want to change that to Libertarian. But I voted in the Republican primary, and I don't like him as much as I liked him then. But even then, I liked him enough to vote for him because he was the best chance against Trump. But in the Republican primary, I voted for Ted Cruz because I did not want Trump. I would have voted for Rand Paul otherwise.
I get you. I mean, maybe I'll forgive you for voting for Cruz, but.
So who did you vote for? Who would you have voted for?
I ended up not voting in the primary, and I mean, my gut was confirmed because Bernie ended up not standing a chance. But that's who I would have voted for if I.
He was neck and neck for a while though.
He was, and I think both of our parties are becoming. Okay, I have to censor myself. Are becoming a bleep show right now.
They're becoming Scrooched up.
Yes. Okay, we'll go with Scrooched. We like it.
Now on to the main event. Donald Trump. I have in my notes, Donald Trump is a horrible person.
Every time I eat a bag of Cheetos, guess what I'm thinking of?
I don't want to know. Donald Trump. Why is he our president? Okay, I have a blog that I write in as well. It's called Barely Protestant. Plug in there, but I can do that because I'm the co-host. But in that, I must have written like 3 articles at least saying, please Christians don't vote for Donald Trump, and I just list thing after thing after thing. And this is
I haven't
before.
read that. You should send that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. But like this is before the whole grab him by the little cat. Yeah. From a Christian standpoint, especially, I mean, he's been pro-abortion his entire life until he magically changed when he decides to run for president. Can anyone with a straight face claim that he's some sort of like godly Christian and some moral, upright man? The guy brags about cheating on his wives. He brags about sleeping with other women. The guy brags about cheating people in business. I mean, really? Just like I wanted to talk about this earlier with education, but I'll bring it up here. When it comes to also education, but when it comes to politics, I think we need to take a sort of an Aristotelian kind of approach of like, well, we have to vote for the person of character. I used to think Bernie was a man of character. Now that I've learned a bit more, I'm not the biggest fan of him, regardless of my huge disagreements. That's why I like people like John Kasich and stuff, because they are men of character, And Trump is not a man of character at all. He's a character, but that's it.
He is that. Yeah, I mean, I was, like, forever, like a lot of people, I did not take him seriously. Mm-hmm. Until he got nominated by the Republican National Convention, and then I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is happening? And I watch a lot of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. That and SNL have helped me cope with all of this. But it was both funny and darkly ironic. It was a week or two before the election. John Oliver did a very brief intermediate episode where he showed a clip of himself like 5 years prior, or a few years prior, before the election even started, and Trump was saying he thought he might want to run for president. And John Oliver said, do it, and I will totally pay for your campaign.
Oh, Lord.
And then it cuts back to John Oliver and the president, and he's covering his face and, like, in shame. Yeah. I mean, I tried watching the debates, and I personally may have been able to make it all the way through, but I was watching them with my girlfriend, Kimber, and she could not tolerate it past the second one. Mm-hmm. It was like we were okay. And if any Trump supporters are watching us, I am not here to personally offend you or put you off from listening to us, but we're here to give our perspective. Listening to Donald Trump in the middle of a debate is like listening to a 3-year-old. They would ask him one question on one topic, and the next minute he's like, how about that ISIS? I hate that ISIS. ISIS needs to die. And I'm like, wait, where are we?
I agree. Hillary Clinton, and I think you would agree with me on Hillary Clinton as well, both of them are horrible. And so for me, I can understand, actually from both sides, I can understand someone saying, I'm going to vote for one or the other because the other one is just so horrible, because they are both just so horrible. The thing that I really don't get are the people who, like, enthusiastically supported Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, to be honest.
I don't know if I would go so far as to say Hillary Clinton herself is a horrible person. I mean, I've heard a lot of things, and I'm not a huge fan myself. Mm-hmm. There was some of her platform I could get behind, some of it I couldn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're stacking both of them up against each other, I mean, there's a lot of politicians that we all have concerns about in the first place versus this wild card over here. But yeah, that's one thing I can agree with you with. It was not like I could have really enthusiastically gotten behind her either.
Yeah. I voted for neither of them for the election. I voted for a guy named Evan McMullen, and I knew it was a, quote, throwaway vote, but on principle, I couldn't vote for either of them.
I mean, yeah, those throwaway votes were kind of almost more of the passive resistance this time around, and
Yeah.
I cast my vote with Hillary just to try to get Trump out of it, but I'm voting in Oklahoma.
I'm voting in Tennessee, so yeah.
I was gonna say something. I really was tempted to write in a vote for Eric Cartman.
We got Eric Cartman. They would have just been giving it to Trump. Yeah,
that's true. That's basically true. I mean, we can say a lot more about Trump, and I don't know, because a lot of stuff I'm thinking right now is still a bunch of stuff that has been said already. But
yeah, well, I mean, I have not been keeping up with the current events. There's something about Sweden or something that he said recently. I don't know.
Yes, I actually was listening to that on NPR today. He was like, how about that Sweden? They're getting overrun by terrorists. And then it came out, because Sweden replied, and they were like, wait, what? And he's like, well, I heard this one thing on Fox News about immigrants and crime that one time. And they're like, no, we haven't had any problems with terrorists since we've accepted refugees.
I actually, one of my Trump supporter friends posted a video about it, saying, "Oh, so Sweden wants to act like there's no terrorism happening," and it was like a video where like there were protesters and one guy like lightly pushed someone over, kind of thing. I was like, "That's some big terrorism right there."
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so we both can't stand Trump, and I understand people who voted for him as the lesser of two evils. Same with Hillary Clinton. I really don't get the people who were enthusiastic about it. Like, just a deplorable man in every sense of the word.
And I have a Facebook friend, and through him, I see a lot of other Trump supporters. It's this very much blind faith that he can't do any wrong, and he's here to save us from all the evil whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to paint all Trump supporters in one brushstroke by any means, but and trying to have an honest discussion with him is very difficult. And I know a lot of conservatives say the extreme liberals are hard to have conversations with too, so I mean, I'm not trying to...
Well, I think any extreme.
Yeah.
Almost by definition. Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's Trump, and I don't want to talk about him anymore. Hopefully we don't do it. Hopefully we don't do any more of that. We probably lost half of our listeners. Oh, well.
Good riddance.
Anyway.
No. Just kidding.
Okay, so what do you think the role of religion is, or should be, in politics?
Oh, I get to answer this one first. Okay, I think I'll take this in two stages. Starting first with what I understand to be American politics. I do stand by our founding principles of keeping the state secular and allowing the church to do what it does, and valuing religious freedom. Like I said, Thomas Jefferson is one of my heroes. I mean, even though he was a slaveholder and had many children through them, and there's a lot of things about him that, I'd have problems with. But I mean, politically, I really admire a lot. And one thing I notice happening now that I am very appalled by, and partly because I was also duped by this when I was a teenager, is all the rhetoric going around right now that the United States was started to be a Christian nation, when that doesn't hold up to the facts at all. I mean, if people were trying to say we need to make the United States a Christian nation, I would disagree in principle, but I could respect that position more than blatantly distorting history. Okay, so that's my first part. I mean, I can get behind the way that our system was historically structured in, especially because of what they were coming from the perversion in England at the time, where it was so enmeshed that once you had one monarch rising to power, the Catholics or the Protestants were completely persecuted, and vice versa. So I think in a way I can get behind that. Now that's my first part. Second part, should it be that way? I think that's more of a complex issue that I'm not going to take a definite stance on at this point, because I believe, even as an atheist, I believe that religion or spirituality, whatever you call it, is a big part of any culture that we're in. And America being its own mixed bag, to put it lightly, of many different cultures and many different religions, it provides us a very unique type of opportunity to try to figure out what this looks like for us. Mm-hmm. And okay, I'm going to throw Trump back into it for just a little bit to give a little, give a little of my own analysis here. Is honestly, I think, in a way, someone like Trump rising to power was inevitable, because historically a lot of the white male has had the power.
Okay.
And lately that's been more threatened, and quite honestly, and this is me speaking as a progressive, but looking back at the last 5 or 6 decades, the civil rights movement and what that spawned, it really spawned something in which civil rights and non-discrimination was more forced. And not in all cases, but in many cases, I think it resulted in those who used to oppress now feeling themselves to be the oppressed. So I think it was a backlash that was waiting to happen, and maybe we didn't see it coming until it came. So that's all I have to say about Trump, again. But we're at a very crucial point right now. I mean, if I'm going to apply this directly to the United States, in trying to figure out what the role between the two needs to be, and I would be willing to entertain a point being raised that should they be separated or not, should it be a polar opposite or not. But at the same time, I would be very cautious about that because of the abuse that's been perpetrated in the past, and especially because now, even though I don't understand this, it seems antithetical to who Trump is, but we have every member of his cabinet now are members of the religious right. Insofar as they're trying to support religious liberty in general, I could get behind it. But my concern is, and again, this is coming from having been raised a fundamentalist, my concern would be what would happen if they did get power. What would that mean for other religions?
Okay.
Or atheists. So, you go ahead.
I wouldn't fully agree with a few parts in that, but not enough to want to continue that rabbit hole, or the rabbit holes that would lead to. But okay, so if we are talking about a sort of a republic with heavy emphasis on democracy, which is what we are, I would say that I would be a huge proponent of separation of church and state. Now, when it comes to a monarchy, this might surprise you a little bit, but I'm growing more and more friendly towards monarchy. Yeah, and do I want to get into this? Okay. With monarchy, you have a single leader of that country who is specifically raised and educated to be that leader, and that is I would want something like a sort of House of Lords, House of Commons, not exactly like the British system, but it's similar enough to where there are those checks and balances. I don't want it to be just a kind of absolute monarchy, but I really think that there's wisdom in someone who is actually raised to be the leader rather than us just voting. I really hate the idea of us voting for it because it's a popularity contest. And we get people like Donald Trump.
Yes. Okay, you do make some good points, but at the same time, I did not expect that from you.
Now, there should always be religious freedom in every nation, I would say, obviously. But I think that if you are not in our country, I think we should have a separation of church and state completely. Because there are way too many cultures. Our country is way too big. All sorts of ideas and problems. But there are so many European countries and Middle Eastern countries and countries throughout the world that are more or less one culture, you know?
Right.
And I think that there's beauty in sort of a one culture, one nation being one group together kind of thing.
I mean, a
But
lot of the psychological researchers will show that that gives you a more cohesive society.
yeah,
When you can
yeah,
identify as one group, you know.
yeah.
Would you mind commenting on what your thoughts are with people on the extreme religious right having power in the U.S.? What do you think that would look like?
Especially when we're talking about people like the moral majority and such. Which I mean, I love Ronald Reagan, but he was elected in large part by the moral majority group. You know, I think the danger there is that they want it to be an evangelical theocracy. We'll take some extreme versions of, like, teaching creation science only kind of thing, or stuff like that. So like I said earlier, my stance on marriage is I want the government not to take part in marriage licenses or anything like that. But in an evangelical understanding of government, the government takes a side and does send out, give out those licenses. And I just don't want the government to be in charge of the sacrament of marriage. The government should not have a... That, to me, it's like saying that you have to get a government license to have your child baptized. Or to take the
You see it as a religious right.
It is a religious right for me, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Well, would you mind, I don't know if I'm derailing you here, but would you mind commenting on what your thoughts are on atheist weddings?
I see it the same as I see any other non-Christian wedding. It's just that is what their thing is. If they want to make it really depends. I'd have to ask them, I guess. Well, what do you think you guys are doing when you're getting married? What is this to you?
I mean, yeah, if we take it as two people committing to each other.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I guess I would say, like, without trying to offend them, I would say, oh, that seems to be sort of like a leftovers of your former religious experience.
Okay,
kind of
I am feeling the need for a totally separate episode, so we'll leave it there.
We'll list that under the sexy one or whatever, the sexy podcast episode.
We might have like 5 sexy episodes now.
all of our episodes are sexy.
Yeah, well, it's what we do. We can't help it.
Anything you want to give a shout out to?
All about that bass.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's like years old, but you put me on the spot. What was I gonna do?
You're years old.
I am.
Well, first of all, I'll give a shout out to Leander for giving us the music.
Oh, definitely.
You can check them out on iTunes. They're really amazing. Logan Ray is a really good friend of mine. He's one of the members of the band. So definitely check them out. And Barely Protestant, my blog spot, if you want to check out stuff from me. It's the word barely and the word Protestant, because that is me. Anything for you?
Well, I have wanted to start a blog for a long time, but I haven't put it together yet, so there's that.
Check out Chris's future blog.
Exactly. And, I mean... No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, we'll see you all next time.
Same bat time, same bat channel.